The driver with a dream. The late afternoon sun bathed the city in a golden hue, painting long shadows across its bustling streets. Marcus Grant adjusted his grip on the leather steering wheel of his impeccably maintained taxi. His crisp blue-collared shirt rolled neatly to his elbows. At 43, Marcus was a man of quiet confidence. His warm brown eyes carried a depth of intelligence and a patience born from years of navigating not just traffic, but life itself. His taxi was more than just a vehicle to him. It was a symbol of the dream he had built from scratch. What the city's harried passengers rarely realized was that Marcus wasn't just a driver. He was the owner of Grant Transportation Services, a highly respected fleet of over 200 taxis that dominated the city's transportation scene. What had started as a scrappy endeavor with 2 second-hand vehicles had grown into a multi-million-dollar enterprise. Today, as he did occasionally, Marcus was behind the wheel of one of his own taxis, reconnecting with the pulse of his business. These drives reminded him of his roots, grounding him amidst the executive meetings, financial spreadsheets, and high-stakes decisions that now defined much of his professional life. To him, staying connected with the daily challenges his drivers faced was invaluable. As Marcus navigated the labyrinthine downtown traffic, his mind was already working on a dozen ideas for improvement. He made mental notes about intersections that could benefit from better coverage in areas where his competitors were slipping. He'd have plenty to discuss at tomorrow's management meeting. But for now, his focus returned to the task at hand, picking up his next passenger. His dispatch system pinged with a new request from the shopping district. Marcus accepted the fare and adjusted his route. The traffic was its usual mix of chaos. Delivery trucks double-parked, cyclists weaving precariously, and pedestrians seemingly oblivious to the crosswalk signals. When he arrived outside Bellamy, a high-end department store renowned for its exclusivity, Marcus positioned his taxi with precision in the designated pickup zone. He tapped his fingers lightly on the steering wheel, observing the flurry of activity outside. A doorman in a tailored coat assisted well-dressed customers with packages that likely cost more than some people's monthly rent. The door of Bellamy swung open, and a woman stepped out, her heels clicking sharply against the pavement. She was immaculately dressed, exuding the kind of confidence that spoke of privilege and entitlement. Marcus glanced at the profile picture on his screen. Patricia Adler. It was a name that carried weight in certain social circles, and the photo matched the woman striding toward him. Her face bore the unmistakable expression of someone perpetually dissatisfied with the world around her. Marcus straightened his posture as Patricia approached, phone pressed to her ear in an animated conversation. Her tone carried an edge, one that suggested she was berating someone for failing to meet her high standards. As she reached the taxi, Patricia ended the call with an exaggerated tap on her phone, muttering under her breath about incompetence. Without so much as a glance in Marcus's direction, she yanked the door open and slid into the back seat. The scent of her expensive floral perfume filled the cabin. 23 Maple Grove Drive, she announced curtly, her tone implying that Marcus should know the address by heart. And take Oak Street. I'm not paying extra because you don't know the fastest route. Marcus nodded, his demeanor calm and professional. Yes, ma'am. Oak Street it is. As he smoothly pulled away from the curb, Patricia immediately turned her attention back to her phone, her manicured fingers flying across the screen. Every few seconds, she let out a disapproving hum, the kind that suggested the world was failing to meet her exacting expectations. The traffic in this city is absurd, she remarked without looking up. I don't understand why they can't keep things moving. We pay enough in taxes, don't we? There's some construction on Fifth Avenue, Marcus replied evenly. It's been causing delays on the side streets. Well, they should work at night, Patricia said dismissively. That's what they do in civilized cities. I was in Tokyo last month, and everything there is efficient. This city could learn a thing or two. Marcus navigated around a cyclist who darted unexpectedly into the lane, braking smoothly to avoid a collision. Patricia made a sound of irritation. "These cyclists act like they own the road," she muttered. "When I was younger, people knew their place." Her words hung in the air, heavy with an undertone Marcus had encountered before. He'd long since learned to let comments like these roll off his back, though they still pricked at the edges of his patience. He focused on the road, maintaining his composure. Patricia, oblivious to his thoughts, continued to air her grievances about the city, the traffic, and the general decline of standards in modern society. As they turned onto Oak Street, the atmosphere shifted. The chaos of downtown gave way to wide, tree-lined avenues and stately homes with manicured lawns. The houses here weren't just homes, they were statements, each more opulent than the last. "Well, at least you know the right way to go," Patricia said, finally glancing up from her phone. "You wouldn't believe how many drivers argue with me about the route. It's like they think they know better than I do." Marcus offered a polite nod through the rearview mirror, suppressing the urge to remind her that he probably knew these streets better than anyone. After all, this was his city, his domain. Patricia's voice softened slightly as she shifted gears from complaining to dispensing unsolicited advice. "You know," she began, "you seem intelligent. Have you ever thought about doing something more ambitious? A man your age should be thinking about his future." The words hung in the air, the condescension unmistakable. Marcus kept his expression neutral, curious to see where she was going with this. "My brother-in-law owns a cleaning service," Patricia continued, her tone taking on a rehearsed quality. "He's always looking for reliable people to manage his crews. It could be a real step up for someone like you." Marcus's lips curved into the faintest hint of a smile, though he kept his eyes on the road. "That's thoughtful of you," he said smoothly. "What makes you think I should be doing something different?" Patricia let out a small laugh, the kind that implied she thought she was speaking to someone who didn't quite understand the world as well as she did. "Well, it's obvious, isn't it? You're well-spoken, and you seem capable enough. Surely you don't want to spend your life just driving people around." As they passed through the pristine streets of Maple Grove Drive, Marcus felt a quiet amusement rising within him. Patricia's assumptions, her patronizing advice, her casual dismissal of his profession. It was a script he'd encountered many times before. But today, he decided, he'd let the story play out a little longer. "Thank you for your concern," Marcus replied, his voice even. "What kind of career would you suggest for someone like me?" "Oh, there are plenty of options," Patricia said, leaning forward slightly, as though sharing a secret. "With some night classes and the right attitude, you could get into a corporate position. My daughter works in HR. She's always talking about entry-level opportunities for people willing to put in the effort." Marcus glanced at her in the mirror, his eyes twinkling with an unreadable expression. "That does sound promising. It must be rewarding to help people find opportunities." "It is," Patricia said, clearly pleased with herself. "You know, sometimes people just need a little nudge in the right direction." Marcus nodded, suppressing a smile. Patricia had no idea just how much her assumptions were about to be challenged. For now, he let her words hang in the air, content to let the conversation unfold naturally. The truth, he knew, would reveal itself soon enough. The assumptions we make. The taxi rolled smoothly down Maple Grove Drive, the epitome of suburban affluence. Towering oaks lined the street, their branches forming a natural canopy that cast dappled shadows across the pristine pavement. Gated mansions sprawled on either side, each more opulent than the last. Patricia seemed at ease here, as though the world outside the confines of neighborhoods like this barely registered in her reality. She leaned back in her seat, her manicured fingers idly toying with the strap of her designer handbag. "This area really is one of the best in the city," she remarked. "Quiet, exclusive, and thankfully untouched by all that so-called modern development." She gestured dismissively toward a distant construction site barely visible through the trees. "They're ruining the character of neighborhoods like this with their cookie-cutter apartments." Marcus said nothing, his focus on the road. He had heard similar sentiments countless times, often from people whose privilege shielded them from the realities of those cookie-cutter developments. For him, each new apartment complex represented a chance to expand his business. New residents meant new customers, and new customers meant growth. But he didn't share these thoughts. Instead, he remained the composed professional, letting Patricia's words wash over him like water off a well-waxed car. She glanced up from her phone, a calculating look in her eye. "You know Marcus. May I call you Marcus?" "Of course, Mom." "Marcus," she repeated as though testing the weight of his name. "Have you ever considered the bigger picture? Driving is fine, of course, but it's not exactly a future, is it? Surely, you've thought about what comes next." Marcus suppressed a smile, his gaze fixed on the road. "What do you mean by the bigger picture?" "Well," Patricia said, leaning forward slightly as though imparting some great wisdom, "a man like you should be thinking about advancement, growth. Take my husband, for example. When he started at his father's law firm, he didn't just settle for being an associate. He worked his way up to partner in 5 years. That's what ambition looks like." Marcus nodded politely. "Sounds like your husband is very driven." "Oh, he is," Patricia said with a proud smile. "It's all about seizing opportunities. You have to think about where you want to be in 10, 20 years. You wouldn't want to spend your whole life driving a taxi, would you?" The question lingered in the air, heavy with implication. Marcus let the silence stretch for a moment before responding. "It's an honest living," he said, his tone measured. "And I've learned a lot from it." Patricia tilted her head, studying him as though trying to unravel a puzzle. "But don't you want more?" she pressed. "I'm sure you have potential. With some guidance, you could really make something of yourself." The faintest smile tugged at the corners of Marcus's lips. "What do you think I should do?" "Well," she said, her voice taking on the tone of someone offering life-altering advice. "For starters, you should aim for something stable, something with growth potential. My brother-in-law runs a successful cleaning service. He's always looking for managers. It's hard work, of course, but it's a step up. And who knows, with the right attitude, you could eventually start your own business." Marcus couldn't help but chuckle softly. "Starting a business? That's ambitious advice." "It's realistic advice," Patricia countered, missing the humor in his voice. "Success doesn't just happen. You need connections, education, and most importantly, the drive to improve yourself." He glanced at her in the rearview mirror, his expression unreadable. "That's good to know. Thank you for sharing." Patricia leaned back, clearly pleased with herself. "You're welcome. I just think everyone deserves a chance to better themselves." As they passed the gates of an exclusive country club, Patricia gestured toward it. "That's where we spend our summers," she said, her tone casual but laced with pride. "You should see the pool. It's Olympic-sized. Of course, membership is quite exclusive, but it's worth it for the amenities." Marcus nodded. "It must be a nice place to unwind." "Oh, it is," Patricia said, her voice softening as she allowed herself a moment of nostalgia. "It's where my husband and I hosted our daughter's engagement party. She's marrying a wonderful man, an investment banker. Very successful." "That sounds lovely," Marcus said, steering the taxi around a slow-moving landscaping truck. "It was," Patricia said with a wistful smile. "But success doesn't come without effort. That's what I always tell my daughter. You have to surround yourself with the right people and never settle for less." Marcus noted the irony of her words, given the assumptions she had made about him within moments of entering his taxi. She had settled on a version of him that suited her narrative. A man of limited ambition, content with mediocrity. The truth, he knew, would come as quite a shock. "Do you have a family, Marcus?" Patricia asked suddenly, her tone curious but still tinged with that subtle air of condescension. "I do," he replied, his voice steady. "A wife and 2 kids." "How wonderful," she said, though her interest seemed perfunctory. "And what does your wife do?" "She's a teacher," Marcus said, keeping his eyes on the road. "A noble profession," Patricia said, her tone implying that it was also modest. It must be challenging to make ends meet. Marcus resisted the urge to correct her, choosing instead to let her assumptions play out. It has its challenges, he said simply. Well, I'm glad you're working hard to support your family, Patricia said, her voice carrying a note of approval. It's important for children to see their parents striving for something better. The taxi slowed as they approached a red light, and Marcus glanced at her in the mirror. I couldn't agree more, he said. Setting an example is important. The light turned green, and the car rolled forward again, passing more stately homes and perfectly trimmed hedges. Patricia glanced out the window, her expression one of serene satisfaction. You know, she said, returning her gaze to Marcus, if you ever need advice about advancing your career, I'd be happy to help. My husband knows a lot of people in various industries. I'm sure we could connect you with someone who could give you a leg up. Marcus smiled faintly. That's very kind of you, Mom. It's no trouble, Patricia said breezily. I just hate to see potential go to waste. As the taxi neared its destination, Marcus began to feel a quiet anticipation building within him. Patricia's assumptions, her unsolicited advice, her condescending generosity, they all stemmed from a single flawed premise, that she knew who he was. Soon enough, she would realize how wrong she had been. The car pulled up to the gates of an impressive estate, and Patricia motioned for Marcus to stop. You can let me out here, she said. I'll walk up the drive. Marcus obliged, putting the car in park and stepping out to open the door for her. As Patricia gathered her belongings, she paused, her gaze falling on the logo emblazoned on the side of the taxi. Grant Transportation Services. Her brow furrowed. Grant Transportation Services, she read aloud, her tone curious. Are you affiliated with them? Marcus met her gaze, his warm brown eyes glinting with quiet amusement. Yes, Mom, he said. I'm very much affiliated with them. Patricia straightened, her confusion evident. In what way? He smiled, extending a hand. Marcus Grant, owner and founder. For a moment, Patricia's carefully constructed composure faltered. Her mouth opened slightly, as though she were about to speak, but no words came out. She stared at him, her expression a mixture of disbelief and dawning realization. You own the company, she finally managed. Marcus nodded, his smile never wavering. That's correct. Every car in our fleet, every driver on the road, it all started with me. Patricia blinked, her face reddening slightly. I had no idea. Most people don't, Marcus said gently. But it's always interesting to hear their thoughts. Patricia's gaze darted to the logo on the car, then back to Marcus. I didn't mean to imply. It's all right, Mom, Marcus said, his tone calm but firm. We all make assumptions. The important thing is what we learn from them. As Patricia stood there, momentarily speechless, Marcus tipped his hat, a small deliberate gesture of courtesy. You have a good evening, Ma'am, he said, stepping back into the driver's seat. As the taxi pulled away, Patricia remained standing at the edge of her driveway, her thoughts racing. Marcus drove on, a small, satisfied smile on his face. Every now and then, it was worth reminding people that success came in many forms, and that sometimes the people you least expected were the ones who had already achieved it. A humbling realization. As Marcus drove away from Patricia's estate, he couldn't help but chuckle softly to himself. The look on her face when he had revealed the truth was one he'd seen before, a mixture of shock, embarrassment, and, occasionally, grudging respect. Patricia's reaction, however, leaned heavily toward the former two emotions. Marcus had no ill will toward her. If anything, he found the encounter amusing. People like Patricia weren't uncommon, but they always provided an opportunity for reflection, on both sides. He adjusted the air conditioning slightly as he merged back onto the main road, his thoughts drifting to the stories behind his success. It had been a long road, paved with hard work, countless setbacks, and moments of doubt. Marcus had grown up in a modest neighborhood, where dreams of owning a business, let alone a thriving fleet, seemed distant and unattainable. But he had always been driven, not by the allure of wealth, but by the desire to create something lasting, something meaningful. His phone buzzed softly in its holder, pulling him from his thoughts. It was a notification from the dispatch system. Another pickup request, this time in the heart of downtown. Marcus tapped the screen to accept, his professional demeanor clicking back into place. As much as he enjoyed these occasional stints behind the wheel, they were also a reminder of how far he'd come and the responsibility he carried as a leader. Meanwhile, Patricia stood frozen in her driveway, clutching her handbag like it was a lifeline. The realization that she had spent the entire ride lecturing the owner of a company about his potential was mortifying. She replayed the conversation in her mind, wincing at every condescending remark she had made. Her cheeks burned with embarrassment. She turned slowly and began walking up the long, winding driveway to her home. The sprawling estate, with its manicured lawns and grand facade, no longer felt as comforting as it usually did. Patricia had always prided herself on her social savvy, her ability to navigate conversations with poise and grace. But today, she had miscalculated. Badly. Inside, the house was immaculate, as always. Patricia placed her handbag on the marble entryway table and headed straight for the kitchen. She poured herself a glass of wine, her hands trembling slightly. She needed to compose herself before her husband arrived home. As she sipped, her thoughts returned to Marcus. How could I have been so blind? She muttered to herself, staring out the window at the expansive backyard. She wasn't used to feeling this way, off balance, unsure of herself. It was a disconcerting sensation, but one she couldn't ignore. Patricia prided herself on being well-informed, always in control. Yet today had shown her how little she truly knew about the world outside her carefully curated bubble. As the evening stretched on, Patricia found herself unable to shake the encounter. She paced the living room, the sound of her heels clicking against the polished hardwood floors. Her initial embarrassment slowly gave way to curiosity. Who was Marcus Grant? How had he built such a successful company? And why had he chosen to spend his afternoon driving a taxi when he clearly didn't need to? The next morning, Marcus arrived at the Grant Transportation Services headquarters, a sleek building that reflected the professionalism and ambition he had instilled in his company. The office buzzed with activity. Dispatchers coordinating drivers, customer service representatives fielding calls, and executives discussing strategies for growth. Marcus greeted his employees warmly as he made his way to the conference room for the management meeting. His presence always had a calming effect on the team. He wasn't just their boss. He was their leader, someone who understood every aspect of the business because he had lived it. The meeting began promptly, with Marcus leading the discussion. They reviewed performance metrics, addressed challenges, and brainstormed new initiatives. Marcus shared his observations from his driving shift the previous day, offering insights on areas for improvement. "We need to increase coverage in the new developments near Maple Grove," he said, pointing to a map projected on the screen. "The demand is going to spike once those apartments fill up. Let's make sure we're ahead of the curve." His team nodded, taking notes and offering suggestions. Marcus valued their input. He had built a culture of collaboration where every voice mattered. As the meeting continued, he found himself reflecting on the stark contrast between his experience with Patricia and the dynamic within his company. Here, assumptions didn't define people. Effort, ideas, and character did. Across town, Patricia was embarking on a mission of her own. She had spent the morning researching Marcus Grant, determined to understand the man she had so thoroughly underestimated. What she discovered only deepened her respect and her regret. Marcus's story was nothing short of inspiring. He had started with 2 second-hand taxis and a dream, working tirelessly to build a company known for its reliability and exceptional service. His fleet now included over 200 vehicles, and his company was considered one of the best in the city. But what truly impressed Patricia were the philanthropic efforts Marcus had spearheaded. Grant Transportation Services regularly donated to community programs, supported local schools, and provided free rides to essential workers during the pandemic. As Patricia read article after article about Marcus' accomplishments, a pang of guilt settled in her chest. She had dismissed him, reduced him to a stereotype, and in doing so, revealed her own biases. It was a humbling realization, and one she knew she couldn't ignore. Later that afternoon, Marcus returned to his office after lunch, finding a neatly wrapped package and an envelope waiting on his desk. Curious, he opened the envelope first. Inside was a handwritten note. "Dear Mr. Grant, I owe you an apology. Yesterday, during our ride, I made assumptions about you that were both unfair and unfounded. I spoke without understanding who you are or the incredible accomplishments you've achieved. Your humility and grace in the face of my ignorance are qualities I deeply admire. I've enclosed a small token of appreciation as a gesture of my respect and regret. I hope you can forgive my behavior and accept my sincere apology. Sincerely, Patricia Adler." Marcus set the note down, his brow furrowing in thought. He unwrapped the package to reveal the beautifully engraved fountain pen, accompanied by a leather-bound journal. The gesture was thoughtful, but what struck Marcus most was the effort Patricia had made to acknowledge her mistake. It wasn't something he encountered often. He leaned back in his chair, staring at the note. While he had long since learned to navigate encounters like the one with Patricia, this response was different. It spoke of someone willing to reflect, to learn, and to grow. With a small smile, Marcus picked up the journal and pen. He admired the craftsmanship, appreciating the sincerity behind the gift. He decided he would respond, not just out of politeness, but because he believed in fostering understanding, even when it came from unexpected places. That evening, as Patricia sat in her sunroom, she was startled by the sound of her doorbell. Rising quickly, she opened the door to find a courier holding a small package. Inside was a simple card and a keychain with the Grant Transportation Services logo. The card read, "Dear Mrs. Adler, thank you for your kind note and thoughtful gift. I appreciate your words and the sentiment behind them. We all have moments where we fail to see the full picture, myself included. What matters is the willingness to learn and grow from those moments. If you ever need a ride, consider this keychain your personal pass. It's a small way of saying we're all part of the journey, no matter where we begin. Warm regards, Marcus Grant." Patricia held the keychain in her hand, a smile spreading across her face. It was a small gesture, but it carried a profound message. Marcus Grant, she realized, wasn't just successful. He was gracious, kind, and wise. And for the first time in a long time, Patricia felt the stirrings of true humility. Bridges across worlds. The city awoke to a quiet drizzle the next morning, its usual buzz softened by the rhythmic patter of rain. Marcus arrived at the Grant Transportation headquarters early, coffee in hand, and a focused energy about him. The letter from Patricia lingered in his mind, not as a distraction, but as a poignant reminder of the invisible walls people built between themselves through assumptions and misunderstanding. Today, Marcus had a packed schedule: interviews with prospective drivers, a meeting with the app development team, and a lunch appointment with a community leader to discuss expanding a transportation initiative for underserved neighborhoods. But amidst his busy itinerary, he found himself reflecting on Patricia's journey. Something about her willingness to own her mistake resonated with him. He saw in her a spark of potential, a chance to build a bridge where others might simply leave rubble. As he worked through the morning, Marcus drafted an idea in the back of his mind. Perhaps Patricia's realization wasn't just an isolated moment. Maybe it could be a catalyst for something greater. Meanwhile, Patricia sat in her sunroom, staring at the rain-dappled garden outside. The keychain Marcus had sent lay on the coffee table beside her, its polished metal catching the soft light. She turned it over in her hand, running her fingers along the engraved company logo. For years, Patricia had moved through the world with an unshakable confidence in her perspective. She believed she understood how things worked, how people worked. Her social circles reinforced her worldview, rarely challenging her assumptions. But Marcus's quiet dignity, his humility, and success had shattered that illusion. Determined to do something meaningful, Patricia opened her laptop and began researching ways to contribute to the community. It was unfamiliar territory for her. Most of her philanthropic efforts had been confined to charity galas and fundraisers for causes that aligned with her social status. This time, she wanted to step outside her comfort zone. As she browsed, a thought struck her. Why not reach out to Marcus? He clearly understood the city's needs better than she did. Maybe he could point her in the right direction, or even involve her in one of his initiatives. It was a bold idea, and one that made her heart race slightly with nerves. She wasn't accustomed to asking for guidance, least of all from someone she had so blatantly misjudged. Later that day, Marcus was in the middle of a meeting with his app development team when his assistant entered the room with a note. "Mrs. Patricia Adler called," she said, handing it to him. "She'd like to speak with you when you have time." Marcus raised an eyebrow, intrigued. Did she say what it was about? "She mentioned something about community work," the assistant replied. "Should I schedule a time?" Marcus nodded. "Let's arrange a meeting for tomorrow afternoon. I'm curious to hear what she has in mind." The next day, Patricia arrived at Marcus's office promptly at the agreed time. She wore a smart, tailored outfit, a departure from the overtly luxurious ensembles she had donned in the past. There was a humility in her demeanor that hadn't been there before, though her natural poise remained intact. Marcus greeted her warmly, gesturing for her to take a seat in his spacious, yet unpretentious, office. The walls were adorned with photographs of Grant Transportation's milestones, the first taxi, community events, and a framed article celebrating their donation of rides for healthcare workers during the pandemic. Patricia took it all in, impressed by the breadth of Marcus's impact. "Mrs. Adler," Marcus began, settling into his chair, "it's a pleasure to see you again. What brings you here today?" Patricia hesitated for a moment, gathering her thoughts. "Mr. Grant, I owe you another thank you, not just for the gesture you sent, but for the lesson you taught me. Our conversation in your taxi, it made me realize how narrow my perspective has been. I've been reflecting on it ever since." Marcus nodded, his expression encouraging. "I appreciate you saying that. It's not easy to confront those realizations." Patricia offered a small smile. "No, it's not. But it's necessary. And it's why I'm here. I want to contribute, to give back in a way that actually matters. I was hoping you could guide me." Marcus leaned back, considering her words. "That's admirable, Mrs. Adler. What kind of contribution are you envisioning?" "I don't know yet," Patricia admitted. "I've always donated to charities, but it feels detached. I want to be involved, to understand the impact. You've built something incredible here, and I'd like to learn from you." Marcus studied her for a moment, weighing her sincerity. Finally, he nodded. "All right, let's start with something close to my heart." He reached for a folder on his desk and slid it toward her. "This is one of our community programs. We provide free rides to seniors who need transportation for medical appointments, grocery shopping, or social events. It's been a success, but we're always looking to expand." Patricia opened the folder, scanning the details. "This is wonderful," she said, her voice genuine. "How can I help?" "You have connections," Marcus said. "Access to resources and networks that could make a difference. If you're willing, I'd like you to join me in a meeting with some of our partners. Your input could be valuable." Patricia nodded, a spark of determination in her eyes. "I'd be honored." Over the next few weeks, Patricia immersed herself in the world of community work. She attended meetings, visited neighborhoods she had never set foot in, and listened to stories that opened her eyes to the challenges people faced. Marcus became both a mentor and a collaborator, guiding her with patience and wisdom. The partnership between them grew stronger with each project. Patricia used her influence to secure funding for an initiative that provided job training for young adults in underserved communities. Marcus, in turn, leveraged his company's resources to offer internships and employment opportunities. Through their efforts, Patricia began to see the city in a new light, not as a backdrop to her privileged life, but as a complex, vibrant community filled with people striving for better futures. Her transformation didn't go unnoticed by those around her, including her husband and daughter, who were both surprised and impressed by her newfound passion. One rainy afternoon, Marcus and Patricia stood side by side at a community center, watching as a group of young adults participated in a workshop on professional development. The program was one of their joint initiatives, and the turnout had exceeded their expectations. "You've come a long way, Mrs. Adler," Marcus said with a smile. "So have you," Patricia replied. "From 2 second-hand taxes to this." Marcus chuckled. "It's been a journey, that's for sure, but it's not over yet." "No," Patricia said, her gaze thoughtful. "It's just beginning." For the first time in years, she felt a sense of purpose that went beyond herself, a purpose inspired by the man who had shown her the power of humility, resilience, and connection. Together, they were building something far greater than either of them could have imagined. Breaking barriers. The brisk chill of early autumn had settled over the city. Golden leaves fluttered down from the trees lining the streets, their colors a stark contrast to the sleek gray buildings in the distance. Patricia pulled her coat tighter as she stepped out of her car, the sound of her heels clicking against the pavement echoing in the crisp morning air. Today wasn't about social appearances or galas. Today was about action. She entered a modest community center nestled in the heart of a neighborhood she once only knew by name, a place far removed from the gated estates and manicured lawns of her world. Inside, the atmosphere buzzed with energy. Tables were set up with informational pamphlets, volunteers were busy organizing supplies, and young adults lined up for workshops on skills ranging from resume writing to financial literacy. Patricia found Marcus near the back of the room, engaged in conversation with a group of volunteers. He wore his usual composed expression, exuding the quiet authority that had become so familiar to her. Spotting Patricia, he excused himself and walked over, offering a warm smile. "Good morning, Mrs. Adler," he said, shaking her hand. "Good morning, Mr. Grant," Patricia replied, matching his formality with a touch of humor. They had developed an easy camaraderie over the past weeks, built on mutual respect and a shared purpose. "How does it look?" Marcus asked, gesturing to the bustling room. "Incredible," Patricia said, genuinely impressed. "The turnout is even better than I expected. These young people are eager for opportunities." Marcus nodded. "That's the heart of it, opportunity. It's amazing what people can achieve when they're given a chance." Their conversation was interrupted by a young woman who approached hesitantly, holding a clipboard. She looked to be in her early 20s, with an air of nervous determination. "Excuse me," she said softly, addressing Marcus. "Mr. Grant, I just wanted to thank you for setting this up. I've never had anyone help me like this before. I'm starting the job training program next week." Marcus's face lit up with a genuine smile. "I'm glad to hear that. What's your name?" "Maria," the woman replied, her voice steadying. "I want to work in logistics someday. My mom says I'm good at organizing things." "That's a valuable skill, Maria," Marcus said, his tone encouraging. "Stick with it, and you'll go far. If you need anything, don't hesitate to reach out." Maria nodded, her expression brightening as she walked away. Patricia watched the exchange, struck by how effortlessly Marcus connected with people. It was a skill she had spent a lifetime trying to perfect, yet he seemed to embody it naturally. As the day progressed, Patricia found herself more involved than she had anticipated. She assisted at the registration table, handed out materials, and even sat in on a financial literacy workshop. The experience was both humbling and invigorating. These were challenges she had never faced: paying bills with limited income, navigating systemic barriers, fighting for a fair shot at a better life. The resilience of the attendees inspired her, and she felt an overwhelming desire to do more. During a break, She and Marcus retreated to a small office for coffee and a brief moment to regroup. Patricia leaned against the desk, her usually pristine appearance slightly disheveled from the morning's activities. "Marcus," she began, swirling her coffee absent-mindedly, "I've been thinking about how much more we could do. These workshops are a start, but they're just scratching the surface." Marcus raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Go on." "Well, take Maria, for example," Patricia said. "She's starting a job training program, but what happens after that? What if she can't afford transportation to get to interviews? What if she needs professional clothes? We're helping people take the first step, but we need to support them through the entire journey." Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "You're right. We can't stop at just opening the door. We need to walk with them through it." Patricia's mind raced as ideas began forming. What if we created a mentorship program? Pair people like Maria with professionals who can guide them. And we could partner with businesses to provide scholarships for training or internships to give them real-world experience. "That's ambitious," Marcus said, a smile tugging at his lips. "But I like it." "I mean it, Marcus," Patricia said, her tone earnest. "I've lived in a bubble for so long, convinced I understood what people needed, but I didn't have a clue. You've shown me what real impact looks like, and I want to help expand it." Marcus leaned back in his chair, studying her with a mixture of respect and curiosity. He had seen many people talk about change, but few were willing to step out of their comfort zones to make it happen. Patricia, he realized, was one of those rare exceptions. "All right," he said finally. "Let's do it. But it won't be easy. A mentorship program takes resources, organization, and trust. Are you ready to put in the work?" Patricia's eyes gleamed with determination. "I am." Over the following weeks, Marcus and Patricia worked tirelessly to turn their vision into reality. They held meetings with local business leaders, presented proposals to potential sponsors, and coordinated with community organizations. Patricia used her connections to secure funding and resources, while Marcus drew on his deep understanding of the city's needs to shape the program. They named the initiative Next Step Forward. It wasn't just about providing opportunities. It was about empowering individuals to take charge of their futures. The mentorship program paired participants with professionals from various industries, offering guidance, support, and networking opportunities. Businesses pledged internships and apprenticeships, while donors contributed to a fund for transportation, professional attire, and other essentials. The launch event for Next Step Forward was held in the same community center where Patricia and Marcus had first discussed the idea. The room was filled with participants, mentors, sponsors, and volunteers, all buzzing with anticipation. Patricia stood near the stage, clutching a folder of talking points, feeling the nervous excitement she hadn't experienced in years. Marcus approached her, his calm presence immediately grounding her. "Ready?" he asked. "As I'll ever be," Patricia replied, taking a deep breath. Marcus stepped onto the stage first, addressing the crowd with his trademark humility and warmth. He spoke about the journey that had led to this moment, the importance of breaking down barriers, and the power of community. When he introduced Patricia as his partner in the initiative, she felt a swell of pride, not for herself, but for what they had built together. Taking the podium, Patricia looked out at the sea of faces, each one a story waiting to be written. She spoke from the heart, acknowledging her own missteps and the lessons she had learned from Marcus and the community. She promised to dedicate herself to ensuring that Next Step Forward would be a success, not just for today, but for years to come. As the event wound down, Patricia and Marcus stood side by side, watching as participants mingled with their mentors and sponsors. The room buzzed with hope and possibility, a testament to what they had achieved together. "You've come a long way, Mrs. Adler," Marcus said, echoing words he had spoken weeks ago. "So have we," Patricia replied, her voice filled with gratitude. "Thank you for showing me what was possible." Marcus smiled, his gaze sweeping over the crowd. "This is just the beginning." Patricia nodded, feeling a sense of purpose she hadn't known was missing. For the first time in her life, she wasn't just part of a community, she was helping to build it. And that, she realized, was the greatest success of all. Legacies of change. It was a crisp winter morning, the kind that painted frost on the windows and left the city streets shimmering under the soft glow of sunlight. Inside the headquarters of Grant Transportation Services, Marcus sat at his desk, reviewing the quarterly reports for Next Step Forward. The numbers were promising. Increased participation, successful job placements, and glowing testimonials from both mentees and mentors. Yet it wasn't just the data that filled Marcus with pride. It was the stories behind the numbers. He glanced at a framed photograph on his desk, taken at the program's launch event. In it, he and Patricia stood side by side, their smiles reflecting the joy and hope of that day. So much had changed since then, not just for the participants, but for Patricia herself. Across town, Patricia was preparing for her day in a way that had become second nature over the past few months. Gone were the mornings spent idly scrolling through social media or planning the next high-profile gala. Instead, Patricia now dedicated her time to meetings with community leaders, organizing workshops, and mentoring participants herself. Her involvement had transformed her, not just outwardly, but in ways she hadn't anticipated. She had grown to love the challenge of navigating this new world, one where status and wealth held less importance than empathy and action. She had learned to listen, to truly understand the needs of others, and to use her resources for something more meaningful than personal comfort. That morning, Patricia arrived at a local community center where Next Step Forward was holding a career fair. The room buzzed with activity as participants moved from table to table, engaging with representatives from various companies. Patricia scanned the room, her heart swelling with pride. This was what change looked like: incremental, messy, but undeniably real. She spotted Maria, the young woman Marcus had encouraged months ago, standing confidently at a booth for a logistics company. Maria was now a full-time employee, having completed her training through the program. Patricia made her way over, catching Maria's eye. "Maria." Patricia greeted her warmly. "How's it going?" Maria beamed. "Mrs. Adler, it's going great. I've been telling everyone about how amazing the program is. It changed my life." Patricia placed a hand on Maria's shoulder, her voice soft. "No, Maria, you changed your life. We just gave you the tools. You did the rest." Later that day, Patricia joined Marcus at a meeting with the city council. They were pitching an expansion of Next Step Forward to include a transportation subsidy for participants. Marcus, as always, was calm and persuasive, presenting the data and sharing stories of the program's impact. Patricia, for her part, added a personal touch, recounting her own transformation and the lessons she had learned from working alongside Marcus. The council members listened intently, impressed not only by the program's success, but also by the unlikely partnership between Marcus and Patricia. By the end of the meeting, they had secured unanimous support for the expansion, a victory that left both of them energized and determined to keep pushing forward. As the weeks turned into months, the impact of Next Step Forward continued to ripple through the community. Marcus and Patricia became a formidable team, each bringing unique strengths to the table. Marcus's deep understanding of the city's needs and his unwavering commitment to his values were complemented by Patricia's ability to navigate the upper echelons of society and secure resources. Their collaboration extended beyond the program. Patricia began hosting small, intimate gatherings at her home, inviting business leaders, philanthropists, and community organizers to discuss initiatives that could benefit the city. These events, far removed from the lavish galas of her past, were focused on action and outcomes. Marcus, too, found himself stepping into new roles. He became a sought-after speaker at conferences on social entrepreneurship, sharing his story and inspiring others to think beyond profit margins. Yet he remained grounded, continuing his monthly shifts behind the wheel of his taxes, a ritual that kept him connected to the people and the city he served. One evening, as Marcus and Patricia wrapped up a long day of meetings, they found themselves sitting in a quiet diner on the edge of downtown. The diner was one of Marcus's favorite spots, a humble place with excellent coffee and a welcoming atmosphere. Patricia had grown to love it too, finding comfort in its simplicity. As they sipped their coffee, Marcus glanced at Patricia. "You've come a long way, you know." She smiled, her eyes reflecting a mix of gratitude and determination. "So have you." Marcus chuckled. "I didn't think I had much further to go." "None of us do," Patricia said thoughtfully, "until someone shows us otherwise." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the hum of the diner filling the space between them. Finally, Patricia spoke again. "Marcus, have you ever thought about what's next for you? Beyond this program, beyond the company?" Marcus considered her question, his gaze distant. "I think about it sometimes," he admitted. "But for now, I'm focused on the work at hand. There's still so much to do." Patricia nodded. "There always will be. But whatever you decide, just know you've already left an incredible legacy." Marcus smiled, his eyes meeting hers. "We've left an incredible legacy. Together." Months later, Next Step Forward reached a milestone. Its first graduating class of participants who had completed mentorships, training programs, and internships. The graduation ceremony was held in a large auditorium, packed with participants, mentors, family members, and community leaders. Marcus and Patricia stood on stage, watching with pride as each graduate received their certificate. As the last name was called, the crowd erupted into applause, a tangible expression of the joy and hope that filled the room. Marcus stepped to the podium, his voice steady and warm. "Today is about more than achievements," he said. "It's about breaking barriers, creating opportunities, and building a better future, together. Each of you has proven that with determination and support, there are no limits to what you can achieve." Patricia joined him, her voice filled with emotion. "This program began as an idea, but it became so much more because of all of you. Your courage, your resilience, and your hard work inspire us every day. This is just the beginning." The graduates stood, cheering and applauding as Marcus and Patricia stepped back. They looked at each other, their smiles reflecting the depth of their partnership and the impact of their shared vision. As the evening wound down, Marcus and Patricia found a quiet moment backstage. Patricia turned to Marcus, her expression soft. "Do you think we've done enough?" she asked. Marcus shook his head, his voice firm but gentle. "We'll never do enough, but we've done something. And that matters." Patricia nodded, her heart full. "It does." Together, they stepped out into the night, the city lights twinkling like stars above them. They were two people from different worlds, brought together by chance, but united by purpose. And as they walked side by side, they knew their journey was far from over. The legacy they were building wasn't just about programs or partnerships. It was about creating a better world, one step at a time.